Judge Natalie Rivers stepped over him every morning for 6 months, never once looking down at the homeless veteran who slept beside the courthouse steps until the day he grabbed her ankle and whispered the 3 words that would save her life. "They're watching you." Welcome back, beautiful souls. Hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because tomorrow's story will blow your mind and you won't want to miss it. Tonight, a homeless veteran, a powerful judge, and 3 words that save a life. They're watching you. Let's begin. The cardboard beneath Gabriel's body had long since given up its battle against the October rain. He shifted against the cold concrete steps of the Jefferson County Courthouse, pulling his Army surplus jacket tighter around shoulders that had once stood proud in military formation. 6 months. 6 months of watching polished shoes click past his makeshift bed, each step a reminder that he'd become part of the scenery, invisible, forgettable, worthless. The morning rush was beginning. Gabriel knew the rhythm by heart. 7:15 a.m. brought the court clerks with their hurried coffee cups, 7:30 brought the lawyers with their expensive briefcases, and 7:45, there she was. Judge Natalie Rivers climbed the courthouse steps with the same measured pace she'd maintained every morning for half a year. Designer heels clicking against stone, tailored suit impeccable, despite the drizzle, her auburn hair pulled back in a perfect bun that seemed to dare the weather to disturb it. She carried herself like she owned not just the courtroom, but the very air around her. Gabriel had memorized everything about her routine, the way she paused at the 7th step to check her phone, how she always entered through the east door, the slight tension in her jaw that suggested her authority came at a price he couldn't begin to imagine. She stepped over his legs without a glance, just as she had 180 times before. What do you think makes someone become invisible to society? Have you ever walked past someone who needed help without realizing it? Share your thoughts below. Inside her chambers, Natalie removed her coat with practiced precision, hanging it on the mahogany rack that had belonged to 3 judges before her. The walls were lined with law books and commendations, tangible proof that Natalie Rivers had clawed her way from the projects to the highest legal honor in the county. At 38, she was the youngest judge ever appointed to Jefferson County Superior Court, and she'd earned every gavel strike. But accolades couldn't fill the silence of her apartment each night. They couldn't erase the hollow feeling that success had built walls around her heart as surely as they'd built respect around her reputation. Her assistant, Mrs. Patterson, knocked and entered with a steaming cup of coffee and the day's docket. "Good morning, Your Honor. The Peterson corruption case is first on the agenda. The media attention is substantial." Natalie nodded, accepting the coffee. The Peterson case, a sprawling investigation into city council bribes and construction kickbacks, had made her enemies. Anonymous threats arrived weekly. Her security detail had been increased twice. But Natalie had built her career on refusing to bend to pressure, and she wouldn't start now. "Any word from Detective Morrison on additional evidence?" Natalie asked, settling behind her desk. "He's scheduled to meet with you at lunch. Says he has something that could break the case wide open." Outside, Gabriel watched the courthouse come alive with another day of justice he'd never see. His stomach cramped with hunger. He'd eaten nothing but vending machine crackers in 2 days, but his attention was fixed on something else entirely. 3 men in dark suits had been watching the building for the past hour. They weren't lawyers. Gabriel had learned to spot those. They weren't cops either. Wrong shoes, wrong posture. These men moved with the calculated stillness of predators sizing up prey. One of them spoke into a radio, his eyes never leaving the east entrance, the entrance Judge Rivers used every morning. Gabriel's military training, dormant for years beneath layers of trauma and self-destruction, suddenly sparked to life. Something was wrong, very wrong. He shifted position, trying to get a better view without drawing attention. The movement sent a sharp pain through his ribs, a souvenir from last week's encounter with 3 teenagers who'd thought kicking a homeless man might be entertaining. But Gabriel ignored the pain, focusing instead on the conversation he could barely hear from his position. "You target confirmed, exits covered when Morrison arrives." Morrison. Detective Morrison, who was meeting with the judge today. Gabriel's blood turned to ice as understanding crashed over him. The Peterson case. The corruption investigation. Someone was planning to silence Judge Rivers before she could hear whatever evidence Detective Morrison was bringing. He looked up at the courthouse windows trying to spot her chambers. Somewhere behind that glass and stone sat a woman who'd stepped over him 180 times, never acknowledging his existence. A woman who represented everything he'd lost: respect, purpose, belonging. A woman who was about to die because no one would believe a homeless veteran's warning. Gabriel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of choice settle on his shoulders like the rain. He could do nothing. Let events unfold, remain invisible and safe in his worthlessness. Or he could try to save her, knowing she'd probably call security before she'd listen to a word he said. His fingers found the dog tags beneath his shirt, the only things of value he still owned. Staff Sergeant Gabriel Torres, United States Army 101st Airborne Division. Once upon a time, those tags had meant something. Once upon a time, he'd sworn an oath to protect and serve. Maybe it was time to remember what that felt like. What do you think Gabriel should do? Would you risk everything to save someone who's never acknowledged you exist? Let me know in the comments. At 11:47 a.m., Gabriel watched Detective Morrison's unmarked sedan pull into the courthouse parking lot. The detective was early, 13 minutes ahead of his scheduled lunch meeting with Judge Rivers. Gabriel had been tracking time obsessively since dawn, his military precision kicking in despite years of trying to forget that part of himself. The three men in suits had repositioned themselves throughout the morning. One now sat on a bench near the parking lot, pretending to read a newspaper. Another had moved to the coffee cart across the street. The third had disappeared entirely, which worried Gabriel most of all. Detective Morrison stepped out of his car, a manila envelope clutched tightly in his left hand. Even from 50 yards away, Gabriel could see the tension in the man's shoulders, the way his eyes swept the area with the paranoia of someone who knew he was carrying dangerous information. Gabriel's stomach churned. Whatever was in that envelope was worth killing for. Morrison started up the courthouse steps, his footsteps echoing against the stone. As he reached the fifth step, just 2 steps below where Gabriel sat invisible against the wall, the detective's phone rang. "Morrison here," he answered, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp autumn air. Gabriel strained to listen, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What do you mean, moved up? The meeting's at noon." Morrison paused, his face darkening. "No, I can't wait until tomorrow. Judge Rivers needs to see this evidence today, before—" The detective's words were cut short as the man from the coffee cart approached. Gabriel recognized the predatory stillness immediately. Time slowed to a crawl, as Gabriel watched the assassin's hand slip beneath his jacket. "Detective Morrison?" The man's voice was honey smooth, professional. "Judge Rivers asked me to escort you to her chambers. There's been a security concern." Morrison hesitated, his instincts clearly screaming danger. But before he could react, a second figure emerged from the courthouse, the missing third man, now dressed as courthouse security. "This way, detective," the fake security guard said, reaching for Morrison's arm. Gabriel saw the trap closing. In 30 seconds, Detective Morrison would be dead, and Judge Rivers would be next. The evidence that could bring down the Peterson corruption ring would disappear, and no one would ever know the truth. His body moved before his mind could protest. "Don't talk," Gabriel whispered urgently, grabbing Detective Morrison's ankle as the man reached his step. The words came out instinctively, the same phrase his sergeant had drilled into them during reconnaissance missions. "Don't talk, don't move, danger close." Morrison jerked back, startled by the homeless man's touch. "What the—" "They're not security," Gabriel hissed, his voice barely audible. Look at their shoes. Wrong brand. Real courthouse security wears Danner boots. These are wearing Italian leather. For a split second, Morrison's training overcame his disgust. His eyes flicked to the men's footwear, then back to Gabriel with new understanding. The fake security guard stepped forward. "Sir, please don't engage with the vagrant. We need to get you inside immediately." But Morrison was already backing away, his hand moving to his weapon. "I think I'll take the main entrance, thanks." Everything exploded into chaos. The assassin from the coffee cart drew his gun, no longer bothering with pretense. The fake security guard lunged for Morrison's envelope. Gabriel, operating on pure instinct, rolled forward and swept the legs of the nearest attacker. "Judge Rivers," Morrison shouted as he stumbled down the steps, clutching the envelope. "It's a trap. Don't trust anyone." Gunshots echoed off the courthouse walls. Screams erupted from pedestrians as people scattered in every direction. Gabriel felt a burning sensation across his shoulder as a bullet grazed him, but he kept moving, using his body to shield Morrison's retreat toward his car. Above them, courthouse windows flew open as security guards poured out, their genuine Danner boots thundering down the steps. "This way," Gabriel grabbed Morrison's arm, pulling him toward an alley between buildings. "I know these streets." "They don't." Morrison hesitated for a heartbeat. Trusting his life to a homeless man went against every instinct, but another gunshot shattered a window inches from his head, making the choice for him. They ran. Behind them, Gabriel could hear the assassins shouting into radios, coordinating with others. This wasn't just a simple hit, it was a full-scale operation to eliminate anyone who threatened the corruption network. As they reached the relative safety of the alley, Morrison finally spoke. "How did you know?" Gabriel pressed his back against the brick wall, his shoulder bleeding, but his mind sharp for the first time in months. "Military training. And I've been watching them all morning." "You're a veteran?" Was Staff Sergeant Gabriel Torres, 101st Airborne. The words felt strange after years of not saying them aloud. Morrison studied Gabriel's face with new respect. "Detective Jim Morrison, Organized Crime Unit, and you just saved my life." "Your life doesn't matter if Judge Rivers is still in danger," Gabriel said bluntly. "They're not going to give up. They'll find another way to get to her." As if summoned by his words, Gabriel's worst fears materialized. Through the alley opening, they could see smoke beginning to rise from the courthouse's east wing. "Fire alarm," Morrison breathed. "They're going to force an evacuation." Gabriel's blood turned to ice as he understood the new plan. In the chaos of an emergency evacuation, it would be easy to separate Judge Rivers from her real security detail. Easy to make her disappear in the confusion. "She always uses the east exit during evacuations," Gabriel said, the words tumbling out. "I've watched the drills. She'll come out right into their hands." Morrison was already reaching for his radio when Gabriel stopped him. "They're monitoring police frequencies," Gabriel said with absolute certainty. "That's how they knew about your meeting time change. If you radio for help, they'll know we're coming." The two men stared at each other, the decorated detective and the invisible veteran, as the weight of their impossible situation settled between them. "So what do we do?" Morrison asked. Gabriel looked toward the courthouse, where smoke was growing thicker and evacuation alarms were beginning to wail. Somewhere in that building was a woman who'd never given him a second glance, a woman who represented everything he'd lost. And somehow she'd become the only thing that mattered. "We save her," Gabriel said simply. "Before they do you think Gabriel and Morrison can overcome the odds stacked against them? What would you do if you witnessed a conspiracy but knew no one would believe you? Let me know your thoughts below." Morrison gripped the envelope tighter, his knuckles white. "The evidence in here, it implicates half the city council and 3 police captains. If Judge Rivers dies before she can act on this—" "She won't," Gabriel said. And for the first time in years he meant it. "Not on my watch." The fire alarms grew louder, mixing with the sound of approaching sirens. Through the smoke and chaos, Gabriel could see figures moving with purpose while everyone else ran in panic. Judge Natalie Rivers was about to step into a trap 6 months in the making. But this time, she wouldn't be stepping over Gabriel Torres. This time he'd be standing right in front of her. The courthouse evacuation was proceeding exactly as Gabriel had predicted. Through the haze of smoke and confusion, he and Morrison crouched behind a maintenance shed, watching as people streamed from every exit, except the east door, where Judge Rivers would emerge directly into the assassin's trap. There, Morrison whispered, pointing to a figure in a tailored suit moving against the flow of evacuees, "That's one of them." Gabriel nodded grimly. The fake security guards had multiplied during the chaos, at least 6 men now positioned around the courthouse, all wearing the wrong boots, all carrying weapons concealed beneath their jackets. They'd turned the entire evacuation into a killing field. "We need to reach her before she comes out," Gabriel said, checking his watch. "Fire protocol says judges evacuate last, after ensuring their staff is safe. That gives us maybe 3 minutes. They moved through the smoke like ghosts, Gabriel's street knowledge and Morrison's police training combining into something neither man could have achieved alone. But as they rounded the corner toward the east entrance, Gabriel's worst fears materialized. Judge Natalie Rivers stood in the doorway, her face pale but composed as she counted her evacuating staff members. Behind her, Mrs. Patterson clutched a stack of files, refusing to leave her judge's side even in an emergency. And positioned perfectly in her blind spot, just 20 feet away, one of the assassins raised his weapon. "Judge Rivers!" Gabriel shouted, breaking from cover. Natalie's head snapped toward the sound, toward the homeless man she'd stepped over countless times, and her expression shifted from confusion to disgust to fear in the span of a heartbeat. "Security," she called, backing toward the courthouse entrance. "There's a vagrant threatening." Her words died as she saw Morrison's badge, then noticed the gun trained on her from across the courtyard. Gabriel threw himself forward as the assassin fired, the bullet meant for Natalie's heart instead tearing through his already wounded shoulder. Pain exploded through his body, but he stayed upright, positioning himself between the judge and the shooter. "Get down!" Morrison shouted, drawing his own weapon and returning fire. But instead of dropping to the ground, Natalie Rivers straightened to her full height, her judicial training overriding common sense. "I will not cower," she declared, her voice carrying the authority that had silenced countless courtrooms. "This is my courthouse, and I demand to know, Your Honor, with respect." "Shut up and listen," Morrison snapped, grabbing her arm as another bullet shattered the glass door behind them. "These men are here to kill you." Natalie yanked her arm free, her eyes blazing with indignation. "Detective Morrison, I presume? You're 13 minutes early for our meeting, and you're in the company of—" Her gaze fell on Gabriel, taking in his bloodied shoulder, his tattered clothes, his desperate eyes. "This vagrant who just assaulted me. He saved your life," Morrison said through gritted teeth, as he fired at another approaching assassin. "He grabbed me," Natalie shot back. "And now you're both disrupting an emergency evacuation with some paranoid fantasy about—" Gabriel's patience snapped. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 18 months on the streets, and now bleeding from 2 bullet wounds while trying to save an ungrateful woman who couldn't see past his appearance. "Lady, you want to stand here and debate while they reload?" He gestured toward the courtyard where muzzle flashes lit up the smoke. "Fine. Die with your dignity intact. I've got nothing left to lose anyway." He turned to walk away, the familiar numbness of worthlessness washing over him. This was exactly why he'd stopped trying to connect with people, why he'd accepted invisibility as his natural state. Even when risking his life to save someone, he was still just a disposable vagrant in their eyes. "Wait," Natalie's voice was quieter now, uncertainty creeping in. "The envelope Detective Morrison is carrying, what's in it?" Morrison held up the blood-stained manila folder. evidence that the Peterson corruption case goes deeper than you know. City council members, police captains, construction companies, they've all been working together. And you're the only judge with the jurisdiction and integrity to stop them. Natalie's face went pale as the implications sank in. So they're trying to eliminate me before I can rule on the evidence. And everyone who helped bring that evidence to light, Gabriel added, pressing his hand against his bleeding shoulder, Detective Morrison, me, anyone who can testify to what we've seen. What do you think it takes for someone in power to truly listen to those society has forgotten? Have you ever had to overcome your own prejudices in a crisis? Share your thoughts below. For the first time, Natalie really looked at Gabriel, not through him, not around him, but directly at him. She saw the intelligence in his eyes that homelessness couldn't erase, the military bearing that addiction couldn't destroy, the courage that society's abandonment couldn't break. "You're bleeding," she said quietly. "I've bled worse," Gabriel replied. "Question is, Your Honor, are you going to keep standing here proving how right and proper you are, or are you going to let us get you somewhere safe, so you can actually serve that justice you're so proud of?" Mrs. Patterson, who had been silent through the entire exchange, suddenly gasped, "Judge Rivers, your car." They looked toward the parking lot to see Natalie's judicial vehicle engulfed in flames. Any hope of a quick escape had literally gone up in smoke. "They've thought of everything," Morrison muttered, reloading his weapon as footsteps echoed from multiple directions. "We're surrounded." Natalie straightened her shoulders, and Gabriel recognized the exact moment when the judge stopped seeing him as a threat and started seeing him as an ally. "Then we don't run," she said, her voice carrying the steel that had earned her the bench at 38. "Detective Morrison, what's the strongest case you can make with that evidence? Given time to present it properly? Life sentences for half the city government. And you," she turned to Gabriel, "you know these streets better than anyone, don't you?" Gabriel nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "Then here's what we're going to do," Natalie said, her legal mind shifting into overdrive. "We're going to find somewhere secure, review this evidence, and I'm going to issue arrest warrants from wherever we are. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to contact Judge Hamilton and tell him he's handling my docket for the rest of the week." "Your Honor," Mrs. Patterson protested, "surely you can't be serious about—" "About what?" "About doing my job." Natalie's eyes flashed. "About refusing to let criminals drive me from my courthouse with fear." Gabriel watched her transformation with something approaching admiration. This wasn't the cold, untouchable figure who'd stepped over him for 6 months. This was a woman who'd clawed her way out of poverty to sit on the highest court in the county, and she hadn't gotten there by backing down from a fight. But admiration wouldn't stop bullets, and the sound of approaching footsteps was getting closer. "Your Honor," Gabriel said quietly, "with respect, making arrest warrants won't matter if you're dead. Right now, the most important thing is keeping you alive long enough to issue them." Natalie met his eyes, and for a moment, Gabriel saw something he hadn't expected: fear. Not of the assassins or the bullets or even death, but of failing, of letting the corruption she'd spent years fighting win, because she'd been too proud to accept help from an unlikely source. "Where can we go?" she asked simply. Gabriel smiled for the first time in months. "I know a place they'll never think to look, but Your Honor, you're going to have to trust a homeless man to keep you safe." The sound of breaking glass echoed from inside the courthouse as the assassins breached the building. Natalie looked at Gabriel's bloodied shoulder, at Morrison's desperate eyes, at the chaos surrounding her orderly world. Then she looked at Mrs. Patterson and said something that would have shocked every lawyer who'd ever appeared before her bench: "Cancel my afternoon appointments. I'm going off the grid." Gabriel's sanctuary wasn't what any of them expected. Beneath the abandoned Riverside Metro station, in a forgotten maintenance tunnel that hadn't seen official use in 15 years, Gabriel had carved out something that resembled civilization. Battery-powered LED lights cast warm circles against brick walls. A military-issue sleeping bag lay neatly folded beside a makeshift desk constructed from milk crates and plywood. Books, dozens of them, rescued from dumpsters and library sales, lined improvised shelves. Jesus, Morrison breathed, following Gabriel down the narrow staircase. "How long have you been living here?" "2 years," Gabriel replied, helping Mrs. Patterson navigate the uneven steps. "City thinks this tunnel was sealed off during the renovation project. They're half right, it's sealed from their end." Judge Natalie Rivers emerged last, her designer heels clicking against concrete as she took in her surroundings. The woman who commanded marble-columned courtrooms now found herself in a homeless veteran's underground refuge, dependent on a man she'd never bothered to acknowledge. She began, then stopped, clearly struggling for words that wouldn't sound condescending. "Safe," Gabriel finished for her, "which is all that matters right now." Above them, the muffled sounds of sirens and shouting filtered through layers of concrete and steel. The assassins would be searching every obvious hiding place: hotels, safe houses, police stations. They'd never think to look in the city's forgotten spaces. Gabriel pulled a first aid kit from beneath his makeshift desk, military surplus, well-maintained despite its age. "Detective Morrison, I need to take a look at that graze on your arm." "And Your Honor," he hesitated, "that glass cut on your cheek needs cleaning before it gets infected." Mrs. Patterson set down the files she'd been clutching. "I can help with that, Judge Rivers." "No," Natalie said quietly, surprising everyone. "Let him do it. He's the one with medical training." She settled onto a folding chair Gabriel produced from somewhere in the shadows, sitting perfectly still as he cleaned the small wound with professional efficiency. This close, she could see details that 6 months of stepping over him had missed: the steadiness of his hands, the precision of his movements, the gentle care he took not to cause unnecessary pain. "You were a medic?" she asked. "Combat engineer," Gabriel replied, applying antiseptic with a light touch. "But you pick up medical skills fast in a war zone. Hold still, this might sting." As he worked, Natalie found herself studying his face. The lines around his eyes spoke of trauma and sleepless nights, but beneath the weathered exterior was something she recognized: the same relentless determination that had driven her from the projects to the bench. Have you ever been forced to depend on someone you previously ignored or judged? How did it change your perspective? Share your experience below. Morrison was examining the evidence envelope, spreading photographs and documents across Gabriel's improvised desk. "Judge Rivers, you need to see this. The Peterson case is just the tip of the iceberg." Natalie reluctantly left Gabriel's gentle ministrations and moved to examine the evidence. Her judicial mask slipped back into place as she studied the documents, but Gabriel noticed she stood closer to him now, as if his presence had become a source of comfort rather than revulsion. "My God," she whispered, examining a series of photographs showing city council members accepting briefcases full of cash. "This goes back 5 years. The housing development project, the waterfront renovation, the school construction contracts, all of it. And these are the bank records showing the money trail," Morrison added, pointing to a series of financial documents. $23 million in bribes and kickbacks. Mrs. Patterson peered over their shoulders. "Judge Rivers, with evidence like this, you could issue arrest warrants for 47 people, Natalie finished, her voice hollow, "including 2 people I considered friends." Gabriel watched her shoulders sag under the weight of betrayal. The corruption she'd been fighting had tentacles reaching into every part of her professional life, poisoning relationships she'd trusted. "That's why they want you dead," he said gently. "You're not just a threat to their money, you're a threat to their entire way of life." A sound from above made them all freeze: footsteps in the abandoned station. Gabriel immediately moved toward the tunnel entrance, gesturing for silence. Through a carefully placed periscope made from mirrors and PVC pipe, another of his ingenious modifications, he could see flashlight beams sweeping the platform. 3 men, he whispered. They're searching systematically. The footsteps grew closer. Gabriel could hear voices now, low and professional. It's basement levels, check every tunnel, can't have gone far. Judge Rivers stood frozen, her face pale in the LED light. This was further from her controlled world than she'd ever imagined, hiding underground like a criminal, dependent on a man society had discarded, her life hanging in the balance of decisions made in shadows. Gabriel moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Your Honor," he whispered. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. In about 30 seconds, they're going to find the maintenance entrance. When that happens, we have 2 choices. We can try to run deeper into the tunnel system, or we can stay and fight." "Fight?" Mrs. Patterson squeaked. "Judge Rivers can't possibly." "I'm not asking her to fight," Gabriel interrupted. "I'm asking her to trust me to do it for her." Natalie looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something that made her chest tighten. This man who had every reason to hate the system she represented, who had been invisible and ignored and forgotten, was willing to die for her. Not for the office she held or the power she wielded, but for her. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Before Gabriel could answer, the sound of metal scraping against concrete echoed through the tunnel. Someone had found the entrance. "Stay behind me," Gabriel said, producing a combat knife from somewhere in his gear. "Detective Morrison, cover the rear entrance. Mrs. Patterson, get down behind that support beam, and don't move until we tell you." "Gabriel," Natalie said softly, using his first name for the first time. He turned, and she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes, not fear of death, but fear of failing to protect her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me as more than just a title." A flashlight beam cut through the darkness at the tunnel entrance. "Movement down here," a voice called. "We've got them." Gabriel stepped forward, placing himself between Judge Natalie Rivers and the men who'd come to kill her. 6 months of invisibility had led to this moment, the moment when a forgotten veteran would make his final stand for a woman who'd finally learned to see him. "Whatever happens," Gabriel said quietly, "remember that evidence. Make sure it gets to Judge Hamilton. Make sure their deaths mean something." The first assassin appeared at the tunnel entrance, weapon drawn. And Gabriel Torres, who had been nobody for so long he'd almost forgotten his own worth, discovered what it felt like to matter again. The confrontation in the tunnel had been swift and decisive. Gabriel's military training, combined with Morrison's police experience and the tactical advantage of knowing the terrain, had overwhelmed the 3 assassins. But victory came at a cost. Morrison had taken a bullet in the thigh, and Gabriel's shoulder wound had reopened during the fight. Now 3 hours later, they sat in the deeper recesses of Gabriel's underground sanctuary, tending wounds and waiting for the all-clear signal from Morrison's trusted contacts in internal affairs. The detective dozed fitfully against a support beam, his leg properly bandaged with supplies from Gabriel's surprisingly well-stocked medical kit. Mrs. Patterson had finally convinced Judge Rivers to let her go. Someone needed to coordinate with the outside world, and the elderly assistant was the least likely to be targeted. She'd left with copies of the evidence, promising to get them safely to Judge Hamilton. Which left Gabriel and Natalie alone for the first time, sitting across from each other in the soft glow of battery-powered lights, with nothing between them but honesty and the weight of shared survival. "Tell me about Afghanistan," Natalie said quietly, breaking a silence that had stretched for nearly an hour. Gabriel looked up from cleaning his knife, surprised by the request. "Why?" "Because I've spent my entire career listening to people's stories, and I've never heard yours. And because," she hesitated, then forged ahead, "because I owe you that much. I walked past you 180 times and never saw you as human. The least I can do now is listen." Gabriel set the knife aside, his hands suddenly uncertain. "It's not a pretty story, Your Honor. Most true stories aren't. And Gabriel, my name is Natalie." The use of his first name spoken in her voice did something strange to his chest. He'd heard her called Your Honor so many times that he'd almost forgotten she had a name beyond her title. Helmand Province, 2019, he began slowly. I was a combat engineer, defusing IEDs, clearing routes, building forward operating bases, good at my job, really good. My unit called me Magic Hands because I could disarm bombs that would have stumped other engineers. Natalie settled back against the brick wall, giving him her complete attention in a way that felt foreign and precious. There was this village, Kolya, now. We'd been working there for months, building a school, training local security forces. The kids would follow us around, practice their English. There was this one girl, maybe 8 years old, named Zara. She had this smile that could light up the entire valley. Gabriel's voice began to crack, and he stopped, staring at his hands. What happened? Natalie asked gently. Intelligence said the Taliban were using the school to store weapons. My CO ordered me to sweep it before the opening ceremony. Standard procedure, go in, check for IEDs, clear it safe. Gabriel's breathing became shallow, but I missed something. A pressure plate under the stage where Zara was supposed to give a welcome speech. The silence stretched between them, heavy with understanding. She stepped on it during the ceremony, Gabriel continued, the words coming out like physical pain. 8 years old, wearing a white dress her mother had sewn by hand. The explosion. He stopped, unable to continue. Natalie reached across the small space between them and took his hand. Her fingers were soft manicured, the complete opposite of his calloused, scarred skin, but her grip was firm and warm. It wasn't your fault, she said. Wasn't it? Gabriel's laugh was bitter. Magic Hands, they called me. The guy who never missed anything, except the one bomb that mattered most. How many bombs did you successfully defuse before that? 237. And how many lives did those save? Gabriel looked up at her, seeing something in her eyes he didn't expect, not pity, but recognition, the look of someone who understood carrying impossible weight. Doesn't matter, he said. I see her face every night. Zara, the way she looked at me right before, trusting, like I was going to keep her safe. Have you ever carried guilt that others told you wasn't yours to bear? How do we learn to forgive ourselves for being human? Share your thoughts below. Natalie was quiet for a long moment, still holding his hand. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. I killed a man once, she said. Gabriel's head snapped up. What? Not directly, but my decision led to his death, and I have to live with that every day. Natalie stared at the tunnel wall, lost in memory. I was a public defender, fresh out of law school, assigned to represent a man named Tony Reeves. Domestic violence case. He'd beaten his girlfriend so badly she was in intensive care. She pulled her hand back from Gabriel's, wrapping her arms around herself. The evidence was overwhelming. Tony was guilty, and we both knew it, but his girlfriend Maria was too scared to testify. Without her testimony, the prosecutor's case was weak. Tony's family offered me twice my annual salary to throw the case, miss a filing deadline, fail to object to inadmissible evidence, anything to get him off. Gabriel leaned forward. You took the money? I took the case seriously. I did my job, gave him the best defense I could, and he was convicted, sentenced 8 years. Natalie's voice became barely a whisper. He hanged himself in his cell 3 weeks later. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? Natalie's eyes blazed with old pain. His mother came to my office the day after the funeral, told me Tony had been trying to get clean, that he'd started going to AA meetings, that he was planning to make amends to Maria when he got out. She said I could have saved him if I'd just taken the money and let him plead down to a lesser charge. Gabriel studied her face, seeing the same self-imposed prison he'd been living in for years. So you became a judge to make sure justice was always served? I became a judge because I was terrified of making another choice that would get someone killed, but every decision I make, every sentence I hand down, I see Tony's face. I wonder if there was another way." They sat in the soft LED light, two broken people who'd spent years punishing themselves for being human in impossible situations. "Maria," Gabriel said suddenly. "What happened to her?" Natalie blinked, surprised by the question. She got clean, went back to school. Last I heard, she was working as a nurse and had custody of her kids back. So your decision keeping Tony in prison, it kept her safe, kept her kids safe. Maybe. Or maybe. And Zara's death, Natalie interrupted. It led to new protocols, didn't it? Better scanning equipment? Different procedures? Gabriel nodded reluctantly. They completely overhauled the bomb detection process after Karya now. Made it so no single engineer carries the full responsibility. How many lives has that saved? Gabriel was quiet, understanding what she was trying to do. I don't know. Dozens, maybe hundreds. So maybe our worst moments led to something better. Maybe the guilt we carry isn't justice, it's just pride in disguise. The belief that we should be perfect, that we should be able to control outcomes that are bigger than any one person. Gabriel looked at her with new eyes. This wasn't the untouchable judge who'd stepped over him every morning. This was a woman who'd climbed out of poverty, fought for justice, and carried the weight of impossible decisions just like him. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Natalie met his gaze, and for the first time Gabriel saw her without any masks, no judicial authority, no professional distance, no protective walls. "Because 6 months ago, I thought I was alone in the world. I thought success meant not needing anyone, not letting anyone close enough to hurt me. But you, a man I never bothered to see, you risked your life for me. Not for Judge Rivers, not for what I represent, but for me." Above them, Gabriel's early warning system chimed softly, Morrison's signal that the all-clear had come through. Soon they'd have to leave this underground sanctuary, return to the world above where she was your honor, and he was invisible again. But right now, in the gentle light of a homeless veteran's refuge, they were just two damaged souls who'd finally learned to see each other clearly. "Gabriel," Natalie said softly, "when this is over, when the trials are finished and the corruption is exposed, I don't want to go back to stepping over you every morning." Gabriel's heart hammered against his ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we've both been alone long enough." Morrison stirred against the support beam, beginning to wake up. Their moment of private honesty was ending, but something fundamental had shifted between them, a recognition that went deeper than gratitude or obligation. They'd found each other in the most unlikely place, and neither of them was ready to let go. The safe house Morrison's contacts had provided was a far cry from Gabriel's underground sanctuary, a modest apartment above a 24-hour diner with clean sheets, running water, and the luxury of windows that actually let in sunlight. But as Gabriel stood under his first hot shower in 6 months, he found himself missing the intimacy of the tunnel, where Natalie had seen him without pretense. Outside the bathroom door, he could hear her voice mixing with Morrison's as they coordinated with internal affairs, federal prosecutors, and Judge Hamilton. Even in hiding, she commanded respect and attention in a way that made Gabriel acutely aware of the gulf between their worlds. When he emerged, dressed in clean clothes Morrison had somehow procured, Natalie was standing at the window overlooking the street below. She'd changed too. Gone were the formal judicial robes, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater that made her look younger, more approachable. "The arraignments start tomorrow," she said, without turning around. "Judge Hamilton will handle the initial hearings, but the prosecution wants me to testify about the assassination attempt. They need my first-hand account to establish the conspiracy charges." Gabriel nodded, settling into a chair across the room. Back in civilization, the easy intimacy they'd shared underground felt fragile, uncertain. "What about the other witnesses?" he asked. Morrison looked up from his laptop, where he'd been coordinating with the FBI task force. Mrs. Patterson is safe. They've got her in protective custody until the trials. But Gabriel, he hesitated. They want you to testify too. Gabriel went very still, in court, in front of cameras and reporters. You're the one who spotted the surveillance team. Without your warning, Judge Rivers would be dead, and this evidence would have disappeared. The prosecutors need your testimony to establish premeditation. I can't, Gabriel said immediately. I'm nobody. A homeless vet with PTSD and a drinking problem. Defense attorneys will tear me apart. Natalie turned from the window, her expression thoughtful. Gabriel, do you trust me? With my life, he answered without hesitation. Then trust me now. You're not nobody, you're the most credible witness we have. A man with no agenda, no political connections, no reason to lie, a decorated veteran who put his life on the line to protect a stranger. Gabriel shook his head. Natalie, you don't understand. When I take the stand, they'll dig into everything. My discharge, the drinking, the fights, the nights I spent in jail for vagrancy. They'll make me look like a delusional vagrant who imagined the whole thing. Let them try, Natalie said fiercely. I'll be right there with you. Something in her tone made both men look at her more closely. Actually, Morrison said slowly, Judge Rivers, you can't be in the courtroom during Gabriel's testimony. Witness separation rules. I won't be there as a judge, Natalie interrupted. I'll be there as his attorney. The room fell silent. What? Gabriel breathed. I'm taking a leave of absence from the bench to represent you during the trials. Pro bono, naturally. Morrison's laptop nearly slid off his lap. Your Honor, with respect, that's career suicide. You can't give up your judgeship to— I'm not giving it up permanently, Natalie said calmly. But Gabriel's right. He needs someone who understands the system, someone who can protect him from character assassination. And she looked directly at Gabriel, I owe him that much. What would you sacrifice for someone who saved your life? Do you think love can bloom between people from completely different worlds? Let me know your thoughts below. Gabriel stood slowly, his mind reeling. Natalie, you can't throw away everything you've worked for because of what? Because of you? She crossed the room to stand in front of him. Gabriel, do you know what I've been thinking about since yesterday? Not the corruption case, not the assassination attempt. I've been thinking about how I walked past you 180 times and never saw you. How I built my entire life around principles of justice and fairness, but I couldn't spare basic human decency for someone who needed it. Gabriel reached for her hands, hardly believing he had the right. That doesn't mean you have to. Yes, it does. Her fingers intertwined with his, because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about what I owe you and started being about what I can't imagine losing. Morrison cleared his throat awkwardly. I'm going to step outside and call my supervisor, he mumbled, grabbing his coat. When the door closed behind him, Gabriel and Natalie were alone for the first time since the tunnel. The weight of unspoken feelings filled the space between them. Natalie, Gabriel said quietly, I need you to understand something. I'm not some project you can fix. I'm not going to magically stop having nightmares or become the kind of man who fits in your world just because. She silenced him by placing her hand against his cheek, her thumb tracing the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. I don't want you to fit in my world, she said. My world is cold and lonely, and full of people who measure worth by titles and bank accounts. I want to fit in yours, the world where helping a stranger matters more than protecting your reputation. Gabriel leaned into her touch, hardly daring to breathe. You don't know what you're saying. Don't I? She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Gabriel, when I was hiding in that tunnel, depending on you to keep me alive, I felt more like myself than I have in years. Not Judge Rivers, not Your Honor, just Natalie. A woman who could trust someone completely. And when this is over? Gabriel asked. "When the trials are finished and the cameras go away and you remember that I'm still a homeless vet with nothing to offer you." Instead of answering, Natalie reached into her purse and pulled out a set of keys. "What are these?" Gabriel asked. "Keys to my guest house," she said simply. "I've been rattling around that big empty place for years, telling myself I needed the space for my career. But really, I was just afraid of letting anyone get close enough to matter." Gabriel stared at the keys like they might explode. "Natalie, you can't just, people will talk. Your reputation will survive," she finished. "Gabriel, I spent so many years climbing to the top of my profession that I forgot what it felt like to connect with another person. You reminded me. And if that costs me some reputation points, so be it." Gabriel took the keys with shaking hands. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Outside, they could hear Morrison talking on his phone, coordinating security details and witness protection protocols. Soon they'd be drawn back into the chaos of exposing corruption and seeking justice. But for now, in the fading afternoon light of a safe house above a diner, two unlikely souls had found something neither had been looking for. Gabriel pulled Natalie close, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "If we do this," he said into her hair, "there's no going back. Once word gets out that Judge Natalie Rivers is involved with a homeless vet, your enemies will use it against you forever. Then we'd better make sure it's worth the fight," she murmured against his chest. As the sun set over the city they were about to shake to its foundations, Gabriel Torres, invisible for so long, finally understood what it meant to be truly seen. And Natalie Rivers, untouchable for so long, finally understood what it meant to let someone in. The trials ahead would test their resolve, their courage, and their unexpected love. But whatever came next, they would face it together. Two broken souls who had learned to heal each other, one honest moment at a time. Morrison's voice drifted through the door. "Yes, sir. They're both ready to testify. This is going to be the biggest corruption trial in the city's history." Gabriel smiled against Natalie's hair. "Ready?" he asked. "With you? I'm ready for anything." The first day of testimony had gone better than anyone expected. Gabriel, clean-shaven and wearing a borrowed suit that Morrison had somehow procured, had delivered his account with military precision. Under Natalie's careful questioning he'd walked the jury through every detail: the suspicious surveillance team, the fake security guards, the coordinated assassination attempt. The media had dubbed them the unlikely heroes, and public sentiment was firmly on their side. By evening Gabriel and Natalie had returned to her guest house feeling cautiously optimistic. That optimism shattered at 3:17 a.m. when FBI agents kicked down the front door. "Gabriel Torres, you're under arrest for the murder of Lieutenant Colonel James McKenna, United States Army." Gabriel jerked awake as flashlight beams cut through the darkness of the guesthouse bedroom. Beside him, Natalie sat up, her hair disheveled, reaching instinctively for a robe. "What's happening?" she demanded, her judicial authority cutting through her confusion. Agent Sarah Hendricks, whom Morrison had introduced as one of their federal contacts, stepped forward with handcuffs. "Ma'am, we have a warrant for Mr. Torres's arrest. He needs to come with us immediately." "On what grounds?" Natalie was fully awake now, her legal mind engaging despite the shock. "Murder in the first degree. Evidence has surfaced that Mr. Torres killed his commanding officer in Afghanistan in 2019, then deserted to avoid court-martial." Gabriel didn't resist as they cuffed him, but his face had gone dead white. "Natalie, I didn't—" "Don't say anything," she snapped, slipping into attorney mode. "Agent Hendricks, I'll need to see the warrant and any supporting documentation, and I want to know why this evidence is surfacing now, in the middle of the biggest corruption trial in the city's history." Hendricks handed over the paperwork with something that looked like sympathy. "Judge Rivers, you should know, this came from the defense team. They've been digging into Mr. Torres' military record, looking for anything to discredit his testimony." Natalie's hands shook as she read the warrant. According to the documents, Gabriel had killed Lieutenant Colonel McKenna during a dispute over civilian casualties, then went AWOL to avoid prosecution. There were witness statements, official reports, even photographs of the crime scene. "Gabrielle," she said quietly, "tell me this isn't true." Gabriel met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something that terrified her, not fear or anger, but the hollow resignation of someone who'd been expecting this moment for years. McKenna was going to cover up what happened at Karyae. Now, he said quietly, "The school bombing wasn't an accident, Natalie. Intelligence knew there were no weapons stored there. They used that village as a weapons test, wanted to see how much collateral damage they could justify if it meant eliminating a high-value target." The FBI agents exchanged glances. This wasn't the denial they'd been expecting. "Gabriel, stop talking," Natalie ordered, but he continued as if he hadn't heard her. "Zara and 17 other children died so McKenna could field test a new bunker buster explosive. When I found out, I confronted him. We fought. He pulled his sidearm, and Gabriel's voice broke. "I killed him in self-defense. Then I ran, because who was going to believe an enlisted man's word against a decorated colonel's reputation? Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and truth? What would you do if someone you loved had been keeping a terrible secret? Share your thoughts below." Agent Hendricks stepped forward. "Mr. Torres, you have the right to remain silent." "I waived that right 4 years ago," Gabriel said bitterly. "Natalie, I should have told you. I wanted to, but I knew this would happen. I knew that getting close to you would destroy everything you'd worked for." Natalie stared at him, her world tilting on its axis. The man she'd fallen in love with, the hero who'd saved her life, was a fugitive from military justice. A killer, whatever his reasons. "Ma'am," Agent Hendricks said gently, "we need to take him now." As they led Gabriel toward the door, he turned back one last time. "Natalie, the corruption case, it's more important than what happens to me. Don't let them use this to discredit the evidence. Those children in Afghanistan, they deserve justice, but so do the people this conspiracy has hurt." "Gabriel, Natalie started, but she couldn't finish the sentence. "Love you? Believe in you, forgive you for lying." All of it felt true and impossible at the same time. "I understand," Gabriel said quietly. "You have a reputation to protect, a career to think about. What we had, it was real, but it was also impossible from the start." The front door closed behind them, leaving Natalie alone in the pre-dawn darkness. By 6 a.m., the story had broken across every news outlet in the city. Corruption witness arrested for murder, Judge Ciro revealed as fugitive killer, unlikely heroes or elaborate con. Natalie's phone rang incessantly, reporters, colleagues, friends wanting to know if she'd known about Gabriel's past. Each call felt like a fresh wound, because the honest answer was that she hadn't known, and that ignorance felt like betrayal. At 8 a.m., Morrison appeared at her door looking haggard and defeated. "The defense attorneys are having a field day," he reported. "They're arguing that Gabriel's entire testimony should be thrown out because he's a fugitive from justice with every reason to lie to avoid extradition." "Can they do that?" "Judge Hamilton is considering it. Without Gabriel's testimony, we lose our strongest evidence of premeditation. The conspiracy charges could get reduced to simple bribery, 5 years maximum instead of life sentences." Natalie sank onto her couch, still wearing the clothes she'd thrown on when the FBI arrived. What about the other evidence? The photographs, the financial records, circumstantial without someone to testify about the assassination attempt. Morrison sat beside her, his expression grim. "Natalie, there's more. The defense is claiming Gabriel manipulated you, that he deliberately targeted you because he knew you were investigating corruption. They're painting him as a con artist who seduced a lonely judge to get close to sensitive case information." The words hit like physical blows. "That's not, we didn't even know each other when." "I know that, and you know that. But to the media, To your colleagues? It looks like you threw away your judicial career for a man who's been lying to you from the beginning. Natalie's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Your Honor, this is Gabriel. Using Morrison's contacts phone. Need you to know McKenna's death is documented in classified files. Real story will exonerate me but destroy military careers. They're offering deal McKem. Team plead guilty to manslaughter. Serve 10 years. Keep quiet about Kariat now. Corruption case proceeds without my testimony. You get your life back. It's better this way. Don't fight for me. I'm not worth it. Natalie stared at the message until the words blurred. Gabriel was ready to sacrifice himself to protect her reputation and ensure the corruption case could proceed. He was offering to disappear from her life as quietly as he'd entered it, taking responsibility for a crime that might have been justified to spare her further scandal. It was exactly the kind of noble, self-sacrificing gesture that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. And it was exactly the kind of choice that would destroy them both. Morrison, she said quietly, I need you to set up a meeting. I want to talk to whoever's handling Gabriel's case. Natalie, you can't. The conflict of interest alone. I'm not asking as his attorney, she interrupted. I'm asking as someone who needs to know the truth. All of it. Morrison studied her face, seeing something that made him nod reluctantly. Natalie looked at the text message again, then at the news reports painting Gabriel as a manipulative killer and her as his naive victim. I'm planning to find out whether the man I love is a hero who made impossible choices, or whether I'm the biggest fool to ever wear judicial robes. Outside, reporters were gathering on her lawn, cameras and microphones ready to capture her statement. The corruption trial was falling apart, Gabriel was facing life in prison or execution, and her own career was hanging by a thread. But for the first time since the FBI had kicked down her door, Judge Natalie Rivers knew exactly what she had to do. Even if it destroyed everything she'd spent her life building. The military detention facility was a fortress of concrete and steel, designed to contain soldiers who had forgotten their oaths. Natalie sat in the sterile visiting room, her hands folded on the metal table, waiting for the man she'd shared her bed and her heart with just 24 hours ago. When Gabriel entered in orange prison garb, flanked by 2 MPs, he looked like a stranger. Gone was the gentle protector who'd held her in the underground sanctuary. This was Staff Sergeant Gabriel Torres, fugitive from military justice, accused killer. But when their eyes met across the table, she saw the same wounded soul she'd fallen in love with. You shouldn't be here, Gabriel said, settling into the chair across from her. The media is already having a field day with this story. If they see you visiting me, let them see, Natalie interrupted. Gabriel, I read the classified files. Gabriel went very still. How? I still have connections in federal court. Judge Morrison, no relation to Detective Morrison, owed me a favor from a case 3 years ago. He granted me access to the sealed military records under attorney-client privilege. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Natalie, those files are classified for a reason. Just reading them could end your career. My career might be over anyway. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Gabriel, Lieutenant Colonel McKenna wasn't just covering up the school bombing. He was selling intelligence to Taliban commanders. The explosion at Qaria now wasn't a weapons test. It was McKenna eliminating witnesses who'd seen him meet with enemy contacts. Gabriel's face went white. That's impossible. Is it? Think about it. Why was intelligence so certain there were weapons in that school? Because McKenna told them there were. Why did the Taliban never attack your unit during the 6 months you were building that base? Because McKenna was paying them to leave you alone while he conducted his business. The pieces clicked together in Gabriel's mind with sickening clarity. Zara and the other children, they weren't collateral damage, they were witnesses. McKenna couldn't risk them identifying him to other American units. Natalie's voice was steady, but Gabriel could see the rage burning in her eyes. When you confronted him, he wasn't just defending a cover-up, he was protecting a treason operation worth millions of dollars. Gabriel buried his face in his hands. Then I didn't just kill my commanding officer, I killed a traitor. You killed a man who was about to shoot you for discovering he'd murdered children to protect his business relationship with the enemy. The visiting room fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of footsteps in the corridor. Why are you telling me this? Gabriel asked finally. Because in 3 hours, you have a meeting with the army prosecutor. They're going to offer you that plea deal, manslaughter, 10 years, case closed. And I think you're going to take it because you believe it's the noble thing to do. Gabriel met her eyes. Isn't it? The corruption case proceeds, you get your reputation back, and I pay for taking a life. Even if McKenna was a traitor, I still killed him. In self-defense, to stop an ongoing act of treason that had already cost innocent lives. Natalie reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of his cuffed hands. Gabriel, if you take that plea, McKenna's co-conspirators walk free. There were others, at least 3 officers who helped facilitate his intelligence sales. They're still out there, still selling secrets, still getting people killed. What would you choose, safety through silence or justice through truth-telling that might destroy you? Have you ever had to decide between protecting someone you love and doing what's right? Share your thoughts below. Gabriel stared at their almost touching hands. And if I don't take the plea? If I fight this? Then we expose everything. McKenna's treason, the cover-up, the real reason those children died. It won't be easy. There are powerful people with careers to protect. But Gabriel, you didn't spend 4 years hiding from the truth. You've been protecting it. At what cost to you, Natalie? If we go public with this, if we challenge the Army's version of events, they'll destroy both of us. Your judicial career will be over, and I could still face execution for killing a superior officer. Natalie was quiet for a long moment, considering the weight of his words. Everything she'd worked for, the judgeship, the respect, the carefully built reputation, all of it balanced on a knife's edge. Do you remember what you told me in the tunnel? She asked finally. About how some choices define who we are. Gabriel nodded. I've spent my entire career making safe choices. I climbed from public defender to judge by never taking risks, never challenging powerful people, never sticking my neck out for anything that wasn't guaranteed to succeed. Natalie's voice grew stronger. But you, a man society had written off as worthless, you risked everything to save my life. Not because it was safe, but because it was right. Natalie, I love you, she said simply. Not Judge Rivers in love with her hero, but Natalie in love with Gabriel, the man who's been carrying impossible guilt for 4 years because he chose justice over career advancement. The man who'd rather go to prison than let corruption flourish. The man who saw a lonely judge step over him every morning and still chose to save her life when it mattered. Gabriel felt something break inside his chest, not the familiar break of trauma but the break of walls finally coming down. If we do this, he said quietly, if we fight this case, there's no guarantee we'll win. The Army protects its own, even the corrupt ones. We could lose everything and accomplish nothing. Then we'll lose everything together. Natalie smiled, and for the first time since his arrest, Gabriel saw the woman who'd held him in the darkness of an underground tunnel. I'd rather fail fighting beside you than succeed by abandoning you. A guard appeared at the door. Time's up. As Gabriel stood to leave, Natalie called his name one last time. Gabriel? When you meet with that prosecutor, remember something. You're not Staff Sergeant Torres the fugitive killer. You're not the invisible homeless man on the courthouse steps. You're the person I choose to love, exactly as you are. And that person is worth fighting for. Gabriel was led away in shackles, but for the first time in 4 years he walked like a soldier again. 3 hours later, in a windowless room in the Army's Judge Advocate General's office, Major Patricia Wells laid out the plea agreement. Manslaughter, 10 years at Fort Leavenworth, honorable discharge upon completion of sentence. Mr. Torres, this is an extremely generous offer, considering the charges you're facing. Gabriel read through the document, his hands steady despite the magnitude of the choice before him. 10 years of his life in exchange for silence about McKenna's treason, safety for Natalie's career in exchange for letting other traitors escape justice. The same choice he'd been making for 4 years, protection through invisibility, safety through silence. But invisible men don't fall in love with federal judges. Silent men don't expose corruption that reaches into the highest levels of government. Gabriel set the pen down without signing. Major Wells, he said calmly, I'd like to request a court-martial, full military trial, all evidence admissible, complete transparency. Major Wells blinked. Mr. Torres, I strongly advise against that course of action. The prosecution will seek the death penalty. Then they'll have to prove their case, Gabriel replied. All of it, including why Lieutenant Colonel McKenna was meeting with Taliban commanders and why those children really died. For the first time in 4 years, Gabriel Torres was no longer running from his past. He was running toward his future, whatever it might cost. 6 months later, the courtroom in Fort Braxton was packed beyond capacity. Media from across the nation had descended to cover what journalists were calling the trial of the century, a case that would determine not only Gabriel Torres's fate, but the future of military accountability and the corruption case that had started it all. Gabriel sat at the defense table in his dress uniform, the ribbons and medals he'd earned in 3 tours of duty gleaming under the harsh courtroom lights. Beside him, Natalie wore a simple black suit, no longer Judge Rivers but Attorney Rivers, having taken an indefinite leave from the bench to represent the man she loved. The prosecution had spent 3 weeks painting Gabriel as a soldier who'd snapped under pressure, killed his commanding officer in a fit of rage, then concocted an elaborate conspiracy theory to justify murder. They'd paraded character witnesses who testified to Gabriel's increasing instability in his final months of service, his drinking, his volatile confrontations with authority. But now it was Natalie's turn. Your Honor, she said, rising to address Military Judge Colonel Sarah Matthews, the defense calls General Patricia Hawkins, retired. A murmur ran through the courtroom as a distinguished woman in her 70s entered. General Hawkins had commanded the theater of operations in Afghanistan during Gabriel's deployment, and she'd been investigating Lieutenant Colonel McKenna's activities when he died. General Hawkins, Natalie began, were you aware of Staff Sergeant Torres' confrontation with Lieutenant Colonel McKenna on the night McKenna died? I was not aware of the confrontation itself, General Hawkins replied in a crisp military voice. But I was aware of the intelligence Sergeant Torres had discovered. He'd come to me 3 days earlier with evidence of McKenna's treasonous activities. The prosecution leaped to their feet. Objection. This witness was not disclosed. Your Honor, Natalie interrupted. General Hawkins was the commanding officer who ordered the classified investigation into Lieutenant Colonel McKenna's activities. Her testimony is directly relevant to the defendant's state of mind and the legitimacy of his concerns about his commanding officer. Colonel Matthews studied the legal briefs before her. Overruled. Continue, General. Gabriel watched in amazement as Natalie methodically dismantled the prosecution's case. She introduced classified documents showing McKenna's secret bank accounts, testimony from Afghan interpreters who'd witnessed his meetings with Taliban commanders, and forensic evidence from the school bombing that proved the explosion had been deliberately targeted to eliminate witnesses. General Hawkins, Natalie continued, in your professional opinion, what would have happened if Staff Sergeant Torres had not acted when he did? McKenna would have eliminated Torres as a witness, just as he'd eliminated those children. Then he would have continued selling intelligence to the enemy, getting American soldiers killed for profit. The prosecution tried desperately to discredit the evidence, arguing that classified documents had been selectively edited, that witnesses had been coached, that the entire defense was an elaborate fiction designed to justify murder. But Natalie had spent months preparing for their arguments. For every challenge they raised, she had documentation. For every character assassination they attempted, she had contradictory evidence. Have you ever watched someone fight not just for justice, but for the truth that everyone wanted to keep buried? What does it take to stand up to powerful institutions? Share your thoughts below. On the final day of testimony, Natalie called Gabriel himself to the stand. Staff Sergeant Torres, she said formally, please tell the court what happened on the night of October 15, 2019. Gabriel's voice was steady as he recounted the events that had haunted him for 4 years. How he'd discovered McKenna's meetings with enemy contacts. How he'd tried to report it through proper channels, only to be told the matter was classified above his clearance level. How he'd finally confronted McKenna directly, hoping to convince his commanding officer to turn himself in. And when Lieutenant Colonel McKenna drew his weapon, Natalie asked. I defended myself, Gabriel said simply. I didn't want to kill him. I wanted him to face justice for what he'd done to those children, but he wasn't going to let me leave that tent alive. The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal, designed to portray Gabriel as an unstable veteran who'd snapped under pressure, but Gabriel had been preparing for this moment for 4 years, and his answers were measured, detailed, and consistent. Sergeant Torres, the prosecutor pressed, isn't it true that you've struggled with alcohol abuse and post-traumatic stress? Yes, sir. And isn't it true that these conditions could have affected your judgment, made you paranoid, caused you to misinterpret normal military activities as something sinister? Gabriel was quiet for a moment, considering the question that had plagued him since the shooting. Sir, PTSD didn't make me discover those bank records. Alcohol didn't forge those documents showing McKenna's meetings with enemy commanders. Mental illness didn't kill those children in Karya now. Gabriel's voice grew stronger. What happened to me after I killed Lieutenant Colonel McKenna? The drinking, the homelessness, the guilt. That was because I thought I'd murdered an innocent man. Finding out he was a traitor doesn't erase those 4 years of hell, but it does mean those children finally have justice. The closing arguments took 2 days. The prosecution painted a picture of a broken soldier who'd committed murder and spent 4 years constructing an elaborate justification. The defense countered with a mountain of evidence showing systematic treason and cover-up at the highest levels of command. The military jury deliberated for 18 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant not guilty. Gabriel closed his eyes as relief washed over him. On the charge of manslaughter, we find the defendant not guilty. Natalie gripped his hand under the defense table. On the charge of conduct unbecoming an officer, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Gabriel turned to Natalie, hardly believing it was over, and found her crying, not tears of relief, but tears of vindication for a man who'd spent 4 years believing he was a killer. But Colonel Matthews wasn't finished. Staff Sergeant Torres, please rise. Gabriel stood at attention, facing the judge who would determine his future. This court finds that your actions on October 15, 2019, were taken in defense of yourself and in defense of ongoing military operations endangered by Lieutenant Colonel McKenna's treasonous activities. Furthermore, this court finds that your 4-year absence from duty, while technically desertion, was the direct result of trauma caused by justified actions taken in the line of duty. Colonel Matthews paused, consulting her notes. Therefore, this court orders your immediate reinstatement to active duty with full back pay and benefits. Furthermore, this court recommends you for the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. Gabriel felt his knees buckle. Natalie caught his arm, steadying him as the implications sank in. Not only was he free, he was vindicated, honored. restored to the military family he'd thought had abandoned him forever. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded them as Gabriel and Natalie emerged into the bright spring sunlight. Questions flew from every direction. What would Gabriel do now? Would Natalie return to the bench? What about the corruption case that had started everything? Staff Sergeant Torres, one reporter called out, "What's next for you?" Gabriel looked at Natalie, then at the crowd of media and supporters who'd gathered to witness the end of his long journey back to dignity. "I'm going to serve my country," he said simply, "and I'm going to marry the woman who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Natalie's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the courthouse. "Is that a proposal, Sergeant?" Gabriel dropped to one knee right there on the courthouse steps, in front of cameras and crowds and the whole watching world. "Judge Natalie Rivers," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the spring air, "you saved my life in more ways than one. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Natalie laughed, pulling him to his feet and kissing him as cameras flashed around them. "Yes, absolutely yes." 6 months later, the corruption trials concluded with 47 convictions and sentences ranging from 5 years to life imprisonment. Judge Hamilton, who'd handled the cases in Natalie's absence, publicly credited her investigative work and Gabriel's testimony as the foundation for the prosecution's success. A year after that, Colonel Gabriel Torres, he'd been promoted following his decorated return to service, and Judge Natalie Torres, she'd returned to the bench after their honeymoon, stood together at the dedication of the Zahra Memorial School in Karyai, now Afghanistan. The school, funded by donations from around the world, served children from 3 villages and bore a plaque reading "In memory of those who died, and in honor of those who seek truth." What do you think it means to find love in the most unexpected places? How can we learn to see the invisible people around us who might need our help? Let me know your final thoughts below. As they watched Afghan children play in the schoolyard that had once been a place of tragedy, Gabriel slipped his arm around his wife's waist. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your safe, predictable life for all this chaos?" Natalie leaned against him, watching the children laugh and learn where others had once died. "Gabriel, I spent 40 years of my life stepping over people, literally and figuratively, because I was so focused on my destination that I forgot to see the journey. You taught me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is stop and help someone get back on their feet. Even if that someone is just a homeless veteran with nothing to offer." Natalie turned in his arms, looking up at the decorated soldier who'd once been invisible on courthouse steps. "Especially then," she said, and kissed her husband under the Afghan sun, in a place where justice had finally fully bloomed. In the end, love had indeed come at last, not despite their differences but because of them. 2 souls from different worlds who'd learned that the greatest victories aren't won in courtrooms or on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when we choose to see each other's worth. And in the laughter of children playing where tragedy once reigned, their story found its perfect healing end.
The end. Thank you for following Gabriel and Natalie's journey from invisible strangers to partners in love and justice. True love really can bloom in the most unexpected places, and sometimes our greatest victories come from the courage to see and save each other. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Thank you for watching this story to the end.